want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine you are standing on a dusty parade ground in Barrackpore. The sun is beating down. It's early 1857. In your hand, you're holding a small, unassuming cylinder. It's a cartridge, just paper, gunpowder, and a bullet. But to you, this isn't just ammo. It's a grenade thrown right into the heart of your identity.
Yeah.
Because to use this thing, to load your rifle, you have to bring it to your lips. You have to bite it. And the grease on that paper, the rumor is it's a cocktail of cow fat and pig fat.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, is the ultimate taboo. If you're Hindu, the cow is sacred. If you're Muslim, the pig is unclean.
Exactly.
So one bite, and you aren't just a soldier following orders anymore. You're an outcast. You've lost your caste, your religion, your place in society. It's a violation of the soul.
It is. And history tells us that this single bite, this grease, sparked a fire that nearly burned the British Empire to the ground. But come on, empires don't crumble just because of little animal fat, do they?
No, they absolutely don't. And that's, that's the trap a lot of students fall into. They see the spark and they completely forget the gunpowder. That cartridge was just the final insult in a century of humiliation.
So sanctuary.
Yeah, we're talking about 100 years of political theft, economic destruction that starved millions, and a kind of social arrogance that treated ancient cultures like dirt. 1857 wasn't a riot about a rifle. It was a dam bursting.
And today, we are going to examine every single crack in that dam.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is a very special edition, and I am super pumped about this one because we are partnering with the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel to bring you this breakdown.
That's right.
We are going to take this standard textbook history, specifically Chapter 11 of the Tamil Nadu Board History book, and turn it into a story you'll actually remember.
It is great to be here. And look, we are going to go deep today. We are covering the causes, the battles, the failures, and the massive aftermath.
Yeah.
But before we get into the heavy history, I have a humble request for everyone listening.
If you find value in what we're doing, if this helps you connect the dots for your exams or just, for your general knowledge, please subscribe to the Simplified UPSC by PPP channel. It really, really helps keep this content coming.
Absolutely. And listen, producing these deep dives takes a village. It really does. So if you are capable and you want to ensure the team can keep creating these super useful breakdowns, please consider supporting us on Patreon.
And on that note, a massive heartfelt shout out to all the current supporters. You guys are the engine behind this show. Seriously, thank you so much.
We see you and we appreciate you. Also, do us a favor, like the video, leave a comment, tell us what you think. It boosts the algorithm and it really helps us reach more learners.
It makes a huge difference.
One last thing before we travel back to the 19th century. I know some of you are probably scrambling to find a pen to take notes right now. Stop, relax, we've got you covered.
I do. Free notes with practice PYQs, that's previous year questions, are available right now on the public Telegram channel. The link is right there for you.
And for the serious aspirants, the ones who want to absolutely crush the mains, there is a premium option.
Yeah, you can access all the videos in this series at once, plus organized premium notes. And when we say premium, we're talking detailed breakdowns, extra PYQs, and model mains answers that show you exactly how to structure your thoughts.
Which is invaluable. So how do they get that?
You just need to join the private Telegram library, DM the public Telegram channel, and the team will get you sorted out.
Okay, housekeeping done. Let's get to the mission. We are breaking down the Great Revolt of 1857, and I want to start with the name itself. You called it the Great Revolt, but I've heard it called the Sepoy Mutiny. I've heard it called the First War of Independence. Why the identity crisis? Why can't historians agree on what to call this thing?
It's not really an identity crisis. It's more of a battle of narratives. The name you use tells me whose side you're on,
Okay, so it's political from the very beginning.
Completely. If you read the British reports from the time, guys like Sir John Lawrence, they are all calling it a Sepoy mutiny. Now, mutiny is a very specific word.
Right, military.
It implies a military uprising, and only military. It suggests that a few bad apples in the army went rogue, but the civilians, the general population, were perfectly happy with British rule.
So it's a PR move, it's damage control. Oh, the peasants love us, it's just these unruly soldiers.
Exactly. It was a containment strategy. I mean, think about it. If they admitted it was a popular uprising, a widespread revolt, they'd have to admit their rule was illegitimate.
Ah, okay.
But then you swing to the complete other side of the spectrum. You have V.D. Savarkar. In the early 20th century, he writes this hugely influential book called The Indian War of Independence.
A very different title.
Day and night, he looks at the very same events, the same violence, the same battles, and says, This wasn't a mutiny. This was a national war to drive out a foreign occupier.
That's a powerful rebranding, but is it accurate? I mean, did the people fighting in 1857 really think of themselves as fighting for India as a nation? Did that concept even exist for them back then?
And that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? That's where the more modern, nuanced historians like R.C. Majumdar and S.N. Sen come in. They offer a more, well, a more academic, maybe even cynical take.
Okay.
Majumdar famously argued that it was neither the first nor national nor a war of independence. His point was that most of the leaders were fighting for their own interests.
Right, like Nana Sahib wanted his pension back and the Rani of Jhansi just wanted her kingdom, Jhansi. They weren't fighting for a democratic republic of India.
Precisely. They were fighting to restore their own feudal power. But then S.N. Sen comes in and sort of bridges that gap. He makes a really clever argument. He says, look, it began as a military struggle, a mutiny over religion, but it ended as a war for independence.
So it evolved.
It evolved. Even if their vision of India wasn't the modern one we have today, they were united by a common enemy. At the end of the day, they all wanted the British out.
Okay, so it's complex. It's a spectrum of views. But here's something that always confuses me. We talk about 1857 as this sudden explosion, but usually explosions have a fuse. Was everything just peaceful and happy until 1857, or were there tremors before the earthquake?
Oh, there were massive tremors. Huge ones. In fact, if you look at the source material from earlier chapters, like chapters 3 and 4, which talk about resistance in South India, you realize that 1857 wasn't the first time this happened. Not by a long shot.
Really?
We absolutely have to talk about the Vellore Mutiny of 1806.
1806, that's 50 years before the Great Revolt. That's a whole lifetime ago.
It is. But the script is almost identical. It's uncanny. It's like a dress rehearsal for 1857. In 1806, the British commander-in-chief in Madras, a man named Sir John Cradock, decided he was going to modernize the army in Vellore.
Uh-oh. I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah. He introduced a new dress code. No caste marks on the forehead, no earrings. The Sepoys had to shave their beards in a particular way.
Which, again, sounds like a direct attack on religious and cultural identity. It's this idea of look like us, not like you.
It's exactly that. But the breaking point, the thing that really set it off, was the new turban. They introduced this new turban that had a leather cockade on it. Now, a rumor spread like wildfire through the barracks that this leather was made from cow or pig skin.
There it is again, the animal fat issue. It's the exact same trigger as the greased cartridges 50 years later.
It hits the exact same nerve. The fear wasn't just about the leather itself. The fear was that this was the first step toward forced conversion to Christianity. The Sepoys thought, first they take our caste marks, then they make us wear this unclean leather, next they'll make us eat beef, and then we're all Christians.
So what happened in Vellore? Did it blow up?
It was incredibly bloody. On July 10th, 1806, the Sepoys rose up. They didn't just strike. They took over the entire fort. They killed Colonel Fancourt, who was the garrison commander. They killed another senior officer, Colonel Mackerras. In total, about 14 British officers and over 100 of their soldiers were killed in the initial attack.
Wow. And didn't they try to reinstate a local king? I seem to remember reading that Tipu Sultan's family was involved in this somehow.
Yes, that's a crucial detail. Tipu Sultan's sons were being held as state prisoners inside Vellore Fort. After taking control, the rebels rushed to their quarters, and they proclaimed the eldest son, Futa Hyder, as their new ruler. They even hoisted the tiger flag of Mysore over the fort.
That is a critical parallel. In 1857, they run to the Mughal emperor in Delhi. In 1806, they run to Tipu's son. They're always looking for that traditional pre-British legitimacy.
Correct. They wanted to return to the old order. They weren't inventing something new. They were trying to restore something old. But the British response in Vellore was terrifyingly swift. There was a Colonel Gillespie stationed in a nearby town called Ranipet, about 14 miles away. He heard the news, galloped to Vellore with his cavalry, and arrived by 9 a.m. the same morning. He literally blew the gates of the fort open with his cannons.
And I'm guessing he didn't come to negotiate terms.
No, it was an absolute massacre. About 800 Indian soldiers were killed inside the fort in just a matter of hours. Some were lined up and shot. Others were executed by being blown from cannons. A horrific punishment where the victim is tied to the mouth of a cannon and, well, vaporized.
That is gruesome. Utterly gruesome.
It was meant to be. It was psychological warfare. And while someone like V.D. Savarkar calls Vellore the Prelude to 1857, the British thought they had solved the problem with brute force. They didn't realize they had just put a lid on a boiling pot.
So the pot just simmers for 50 years. Let's fast forward to the 1850s. The pressure is building again. Let's break down the ingredients of this gunpowder you mentioned earlier. Where do we start? Let's start with the political causes. The British were getting really greedy for land, weren't they?
Greedy is an understatement. This was the era of Lord Dalhousie. He was an imperialist to the bone. He looked at the map of India and he hated seeing the yellow bits, the princely states. He wanted the whole map to be red direct British territory. So he invented a legal weapon to make that happen. It was called the Doctrine of Lapse.
Okay, this is a term that every UPSC aspirant memorizes, but let's really unpack what it meant emotionally for the people on the receiving end. What exactly was the doctrine?
So, the doctrine stated that if an Indian ruler of a dependent state died without a biological, natural-born male heir, he was not allowed to pass his kingdom on to an adopted son. The state would lapse, meaning it would be automatically annexed by the British East India Company.
But wait, adoption was a fundamental part of Indian culture, both Hindu and Muslim. If you didn't have a son, you adopted one to perform your funeral rites so your soul could find peace. And politically, that adopted son was your 100% legal heir. Dalhousie just canceled that.
He just canceled it, threw it out. Think of it as a clash of civilizations. The British were obsessed with their own ideas of biological lineage and bureaucratic rules. Indian society operated on spiritual and customary adoption. Dalhousie essentially said, "Your ancient traditions don't fit our spreadsheet, so you lose your kingdom."
And this hit some really big players.
Huge players. Satara was the first to fall in 1848. Then came Sambalpur, Udaipur, Nagpur. But the most famous victim, the one everyone knows, was Jhansi.
The Rani.
Raj of Jhansi died, leaving behind his young wife, Rani Lakshmibai, and an adopted son named Damodar. Dalhousie refused to recognize the boy. He just declared the throne vacant and annexed the state. Imagine the rage of the Rani. She's grieving her husband, and this foreign bureaucrat thousands of miles away tells her that her son is illegitimate and her home is now government property.
Main Jhansi nahi dungi. I will not give up my Jhansi. That legendary refusal starts right there. But it wasn't just the Doctrine of Lapse. They also just annexed places because they felt like it, right? I'm thinking of Oud, or Awad.
Oud is maybe the most tragic case of all. The Nawab of Oud, Wajid Ali Shah, was actually very submissive to the British. He was their ally, a puppet even. But the British resident there, a man named William Sleeman, sent reports back saying the administration was messy and corrupt, which, to be fair, it probably was. But Sleeman's advice was for the British to just take over the administration, not to dethrone the Nawab.
But Dalhousie didn't listen.
No, he went further. In 1856, he annexed Oud outright on the grounds of misgovernment. He kicked out the Nawab and sent him into exile in Calcutta. This sent a shockwave through the rest of India. All the other princes thought, my God, if they can do this to Wajid Ali Shah, who was their friend, what on earth will they do to us? No one felt safe.
And it wasn't just the princes who were angry about Oud, it was the soldiers too. This is a critical link.
Yes, this is a key connection that often gets missed. A huge percentage of the Bengal army, the Sepoys, were recruited from Oud. Oud was known as the nursery of the Bengal army. So when the British annexed Oud, they weren't just taking a piece of land, they were directly humiliating the families of their own soldiers. The Sepoy felt that he was out there fighting for a power that had just robbed his father and his brother back home. The betrayal was personal.
So politically, everyone from the Queen of Jhansi down to the regular soldier in the barracks is furious. But let's talk about the money. Because revolutions are usually fueled by hunger, we have to talk about the economic causes.
Yes, and this is the part that often gets glossed over in popular history, but it is the most devastating. We use this term, the drain of wealth, but it sounds so abstract. Let's make it concrete. This links directly to that 2017 UPSC mains question, which asked about the decline of traditional artisanal industry.
Right, so let's answer it. How did the British systematically destroy the Indian economy?
2 words: de-industrialization. Before the British, India was a manufacturing powerhouse. We exported high-quality textiles, muslin, calico, silk to the entire world. The Indian weaver was a highly skilled, respected artisan. Then came the Industrial Revolution in England. Suddenly, factories in Manchester could produce cloth cheaply with machines.
Okay, so it's just competition. That's capitalism, isn't it?
Yeah.
The old way gets replaced by the new, more efficient way.
It would be capitalism if it was a fair fight. It wasn't even close. The British rigged the game completely. To protect their own factories, they slapped massive tariffs. We're talking 70% or 80% on Indian cloth trying to enter Britain. But at the same time, they forced India, through their political power, to accept British cloth with zero duty.
So they locked Indian goods out of Europe and simultaneously flooded the Indian market with their own cheap goods.
Exactly. It was a one-way street. The Indian weaver, with his handloom, couldn't possibly compete. The entire handloom industry, which employed millions, just collapsed. Now, think about this. In Europe, when old industries died, people moved to cities to work in new factories. But the British didn't build any factories in India. They just destroyed the artisans. So where did those millions of weavers and spinners go?
They had nowhere to go but back to the village, back to the farm.
Correct. They fell back on the land. They became landless peasants or overcrowded the family farm. This absolutely crushed the rural economy because the land was already supporting as many people as it could. You had way too many people trying to survive on too little land. The standard of living just plummeted.
And for the peasants who were already on the land, life wasn't a picnic either. The taxes were insane.
The land revenue policies were extortionate. Whether there was a drought or a flood, the tax had to be paid in cash, which forced peasants into the hands of moneylenders. And then you have the indigo planters. The plantation system, which really took off after 1833, forced peasants to grow indigo, a blue dye for British cloth, instead of food crops like rice or wheat.
And the planters were famously brutal.
Unbelievably so. If a peasant refused to grow indigo, he was beaten, his cattle were seized, his house was burned down. It was a system of terror. So by 1857, the Indian countryside was a powder keg of starvation, debt, and pure rage.
Okay, so political theft, check. Economic ruin, double check. Now let's get personal. Social and religious causes. This is where that arrogance you mentioned really comes in.
This is the emotional layer. The British, in the early 19th century, began to develop this intense racial superiority complex. They started to see themselves not just as rulers, but as a civilizing force for a backward people. They openly called Indians niggers and swars, which means pigs. There were countless incidents where British officers would assault Indians on the street for not bowing low enough or for getting in their way.
And then, layered on top of that personal humiliation, was the fear of Christianity.
The missionary activity was exploding. The Charter Act of 1813 had officially allowed Christian missionaries to come to India and proselytize. And they were seen everywhere, in marketplaces, in schools, and hospitals, preaching against Hinduism and Islam. They called Indian gods idols and dismissed ancient customs as barbaric.
To be fair, though, some of those customs were pretty problematic, like sati. The British banned sati, the practice of widow burning, in 1829. Surely that was a good thing, right?
To us, today, yes, absolutely, it was a vital reform. But you have to try and see it through the eyes of a conservative Brahmin in 1850. He sees a foreign government interfering with ancient religious laws. He sees them legalizing widow remarriage. He sees them pushing Western education that mocks his scriptures. He doesn't see reform. He sees a systematic conspiracy to destroy his religion and turn his children into Christians.
It's the slippery slope argument again. First, they stop sati. Next, they'll force us all to eat beef.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the British were completely tone deaf to this fear. They just kept pushing. They passed the Religious Disabilities Act of 1850, which was a huge deal. It changed Hindu law. It basically said that if a Hindu converted to another religion, like Christianity, he could still inherit his father's property.
Oh, wow. Because before that, if you left the religion, you were automatically cut out of the family will. So this law essentially removed the financial penalty for converting to Christianity.
You got it. And to the Orthodox Hindu, this was the ultimate proof. See, they are rewriting our sacred laws to make it easier for people to convert. It was seen as a direct bribe.
Okay, the final stick of dynamite in the pile before the spark. The military itself. The Sepoys. These guys were the sword arm of the British Empire in India. Why did they turn?
Because they were treated like second-class citizens in their own army. An Indian soldier, no matter how brave or talented, no matter how many years he served, could never rise above the rank of Subedar. A raw British recruit, a teenager fresh off the boat, would automatically outrank a veteran Indian Subedar with decades of experience.
That's incredibly humiliating. And the pay was terrible, too.
The pay was stagnant while the cost of living was rising. But the most specific grievance that caused a lot of anger was the issue of bata.
Bata. Explain that.
So, bata was a foreign service allowance. Historically, if the company sent a sepoy to fight in a foreign land like when they were conquering Punjab or Sindh, they paid him extra. It's like a hardship bonus for serving away from home territory.
Makes sense.
But as the British conquered these territories, they officially became part of the British Empire. So the government turned around and said, well, Sindh isn't foreign anymore. It's ours now, so no more bada for you.
You have got to be kidding me. So the soldier is doing the exact same dangerous job far from his home, but his pay gets cut because of a technicality on a map that he helped draw with his own blood.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Congratulations on conquering this for us, and as a reward, you get a pay cut. It was infuriating. And then came the final straw, the General Service Enlistment Act of 1856. This law stated that all new recruits had to sign a pledge that they would serve anywhere the government needed them, and that included overseas.
And for a high-caste Hindu, crossing the Kalapani, the Black Water, the ocean meant losing your caste.
It meant social death. It was a massive taboo. If you crossed the ocean, your family and your community wouldn't eat with you when you came back. You'd be an outcast. So the government was now forcing them to choose between their job and their very soul.
The pyre has been well and truly built. Now we return to the spark, the Enfield rifle.
The government introduces this new rifle. It's a fantastic weapon, much more range, much more accuracy than the old Brown Bess musket. But the cartridges for it are greased to make them slide into the barrel easily. And the rumor spreads. Cow fat and pig fat.
Now here's a question. Did the British actually use cow and pig fat? Or was it just a rumor that got out of hand?
The great tragedy of it all is, it was likely true. At the Woolwich Arsenal in England, where the cartridges were made, they were using animal tallow. They simply didn't think about the religious implications for their soldiers in India. By the time they realized their catastrophic mistake and frantically tried to change the grease to vegetable oil or beeswax, the damage was done. The Sepoys didn't believe them. Trust was at absolute zero.
So this brings us to Barrackpore, March 29th, 1857, and we meet Mangal Pandey.
Mangal Pandey is a young Sepoy of the 34th Native Infantry. He's agitated. Some accounts say he was high on bang, or cannabis, to work up the nerve for what he was about to do. He steps out onto the parade ground, rifle in hand, and starts calling on his fellow soldiers to rise up. He's yelling, "Come out, the Europeans are here. Why are you waiting? Bite the cartridge and you are damned to hell."
And he attacks his officers.
Yeah, he does. He fires at the sergeant major, a man named Hewson. He misses, but then he attacks Lieutenant Bow with a tall war, a sword. That's a chaotic scene. But here's the key observation. The other Sepoys, his comrades, they don't help the British officers. But they also don't join Mangal Pandey in the attack. They just stand there watching. It's this critical moment of hesitation.
Mangal Pandey realizes he's on his own.
He does. He sees he's about to be captured, so he tries to shoot himself, but only wounds himself. He's captured, put on trial, and is hanged on April 8th. The entire 34th Regiment is disbanded as a punishment. The British think, okay, problem solved. We handled the bad apple.
But they were so wrong, because just a month later, on May 10th, the real explosion happens in Meerut.
Meerut was completely different. Here, 85 soldiers of the 3rd Native Cavalry had refused to touch the new cartridges during a drill. They were immediately court-martialed and sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. But the British commander made a fatal mistake. He decided he needed to humiliate them publicly.
What did he do?
On the morning of May 9th, he had all 85 men paraded in front of the entire garrison. He had them stripped of their uniforms and shackled in iron fetters right there in front of thousands of their comrades. Their fellow soldiers had to watch their brothers being treated like common criminals. As they were led away to jail, the prisoners reportedly threw their boots at their comrades and cursed them, shouting, "We're going to jail for our religion, and you just stand there and do nothing."
That public shaming must have just broken the dam.
It did. That night, the other Sepoys couldn't sleep. The women of the bazaar reportedly taunted them, saying they should wear bangles. The next day, May 10th, was a Sunday. While the British officers and their families were preparing for evening church service, the Sepoys broke. They stormed the armory, seized weapons, and then they went to the jail and released their 85 comrades. And then the killing started. They shot their officers, they burned the bungalows. Meerut was in flames.
And then they did something strategically brilliant. They didn't just scatter into the jungle or go on a rampage. They marched.
They marched all night, about 40 miles to Delhi. This is absolutely crucial. They knew that a mutiny, to become a revolution, needed a leader. It needed a symbol. And there was only one man in all of India who could command the symbolic loyalty of both Hindus and Muslims, the Mughal emperor.
The aged Bahadur Shah Zafar.
He was ancient, 82 years old. He was a poet, not a warrior. He was practically a pensioner of the British, living in the Red Fort on their dime. When the Sepoys from Meerut arrived at the gates of the Red Fort on the morning of May 11th, shouting, "Dee! Dee!" for the faith, Bahadur Shah was terrified. He actually sent a message to the British commander in Agra saying, "Help, these ruffians have arrived."
That is both hilarious and tragic. The leader of the Great Revolt tried to call the cops on the rebels.
He had no choice in the matter. The rebels basically forced him. They swarmed into the city, killed a British resident, and proclaimed Bahadur Shah the Emperor of Hindustan. Reluctantly, he gave his blessing. And in that moment, what started as a mutiny was transformed into a potential war of independence. Now, the rebels had a flag, a capital, and an emperor. The revolt spread like wildfire across North India.
Okay, let's tour the hot spots of the rebellion. This is where the exam loves to match the leader to the location. Let's start with Kanpur.
Kanpur was led by Nana Sahib. We mentioned him earlier, the adopted son of the last Peshwa, Bajirao II. The British had cut off his pension and refused to recognize his title. So when the revolt started, he saw his chance. He expelled the small British garrison from Kanpur.
And this is where the really dark side of the revolt comes out, isn't it? The massacre at Satacharagat.
It is a very dark chapter. The besieged British garrison, under General Wheeler, surrendered on the promise of safe passage down the river to Allahabad. As they were boarding the boats at the riverbank, the Satacharagat, someone fired a shot, we don't know who. Panic ensued. The sepoys on the banks opened fire. Most of the men were killed right there. The surviving women and children were taken prisoner, and later, well, they were brutally killed in what's known as the Bibikar massacre.
It was horrific, indiscriminate violence, and it absolutely ensured that when the British came back to retake these cities, they would show absolutely no mercy. But Nana Sahib himself wasn't a great military mind. He had a secret weapon.
He did. His commander-in-chief, Tantia Tope. He was the real military brain of the operation. Tantia Tope was a master of guerrilla warfare. Even long after Kanpur fell back to the British, he kept fighting. He was the one who eventually linked up with the Rani of Jhansi.
Speaking of whom, let's go to Jhansi. This is the most famous, most cinematic part of the whole story.
It is. Rani Lakshmi Bai. She had been trying to negotiate with the British for months, but they just bombarded her with letters demanding she surrender and accept their annexation. When the revolt finally broke out across the region, she took charge. She fortified Jhansi and prepared for a siege. Sir Hugh Rose, the British commander, arrived and surrounded the city. The battle was incredibly fierce. There are accounts of women and even children in Jhansi being seen on the walls, repairing the damage from cannonballs and carrying ammunition to the soldiers.
She eventually had to flee, right? She couldn't hold the fort forever.
No. As the British were about to storm the citadel, she strapped her adopted son to her back. That's the legend anyway. And in the dead of night, jumped her horse from the high ramparts and escaped. She made her way to Kalpi to join other rebel forces, and then on to Gwalior. She and Tantia Tope actually managed to capture the massive Gwalior fort from the Scindia ruler, who was loyal to the British.
But her end was near?
It was. She died fighting on the battlefield at a place called Kota Ki Sarai on June 17, 1858, dressed as a cavalryman, fighting to the last. Sir Hugh Rose, the very general who defeated her, paid her the ultimate, if slightly sexist, compliment. He wrote in his report, "Here lay the woman who was the only man among the rebels."
Wow. Sexist, but you can feel the respect there. Okay, let's move to Lucknow.
Lucknow, the capital of Oud. Here the revolt was a genuinely popular uprising. The whole countryside rose up. It was led by Begum Hazrat Mahal. She was one of the wives of the exiled Nawab, and she was fighting for her young son, Burjis Kader, to be recognized as the ruler. The siege of the Lucknow residency is one of the most famous episodes of the revolt. The small British contingent was trapped inside the residency building for months under constant attack. And it wasn't just soldiers attacking them. It was the whole population of the city. Zamindars, peasants, everyone.
And finally, we have to give a shout out to the old tiger fighting in Bihar.
Absolutely. Kunwar Singh of Jagdiakshapur. He was a Rajput Zamindar whose lands had been taken away by the British. The man was 80 years old. 80. But when the rebellious sepoys from Danapur came to him, he took command. He led them in battle. There's a famous story where his hand was wounded by a bullet. Fearing that the wound would get infected and slow him down, he just cut off his own hand with his sword and threw it into the Ganges.
An 80-year-old cutting off his own hand? That is unbelievably tough.
It shows the depth of the resentment, the sheer will to fight. He crossed the Ganges, liberated parts of Bihar, and actually died a free man in his own palace just days after winning a final victory against the British.
What a story! But despite all this incredible heroism, Mangal Pandey's defiance, the Rani's bravery, Kunwar Singh's grit, the revolt failed. The British, who were hugely outnumbered, crushed it. Why? How did a tiny island nation reconquer an entire subcontinent in turmoil?
It's a critical question. And there are 5 main reasons that historians usually point to. First, and maybe most importantly, lunar geography. You have to look at the map. The revolt was incredibly intense in the North Delhi, Oud, Rohilkhand, central India, but South India, almost completely quiet. The very powerful Madras army remained loyal. The Bombay presidency was largely quiet. And crucially, the Punjab, which the British had only recently and brutally conquered, stayed loyal. The Sikhs helped the British. The Gurkhas remained loyal, so the British could use troops from these loyal areas to crush the rebellion in the north.
So it was never a truly pan-Indian revolt.
No, not even close. Second big reason, lack of unity and a common plan. There was no central command. There was no shared vision for what a post-British India would look like. Nana Sahib fought to restore the Peshwaship in Pune. The Rani fought for her kingdom of Jhansi. The Muslims around Delhi wanted to restore the Mughal Empire. They were all united in their hatred for the British, but they were deeply divided on everything else.
Third reason?
The middle class sat it out. This is a big one. The modern educated Indians, especially the Bengali intelligentsia in Calcutta, did not support the rebels. In fact, many of them actively prayed for a swift British victory.
That seems shocking to us today. Why would they do that?
Because they looked at the rebels, at Bahadur Shah, at Nana Sahib, and they saw the past. They saw feudal lords, superstition, and a return to chaos. They believed that the British, for all their terrible flaws, represented modernity, science, the rule of law, and eventual progress. They thought, if the rebels win, India goes back to the Dark Ages. If the British stay, eventually we will learn their ways and demand our rights.
That is a fascinating and tragic contradiction. They chose the colonizer because they believed it was the only path to modernization.
Exactly. Fourth reason, and this is a straightforward one, superior leadership. The British had seasoned professional generals, John Nicholson, who retook Delhi, Sir Colin Campbell, Sir Hugh Rose. They were professional military men who knew strategy and logistics. The rebels had incredibly brave leaders, but they were feudal chiefs, not coordinated modern generals.
And finally, the technology. You mentioned it before.
The telegraph. This was the real game changer. The rebels would cut the telegraph wires wherever they found them, but the British used the system brilliantly to coordinate troop movements instantly across hundreds of miles. One captured rebel leader was supposedly shown the telegraph machine and said, "It is that accursed electric wire that strangled us."
So by the end of 1858, the dust settles. The British are back in control, but it's not the same British Empire, is it? The East India Company is done for.
That is the single biggest result of the revolt. The Government of India Act of 1858. British Parliament basically looked at the East India Company and said, "You guys messed up on a historic scale. You caused the biggest revolt in our entire imperial history. You're fired."
So the company, which had ruled India for 100 years, is just abolished. Who takes over?
The Crown. Queen Victoria is officially proclaimed the Empress of India. The power to govern India passes directly to the British government, run by a new cabinet minister called the Secretary of State for India. And in India, the Governor-General gets a new, more prestigious title, the Viceroy. Lord Canning, who was the Governor-General during the revolt, becomes the very first Viceroy.
And they issue a very famous document to signal this change, the Queen's Proclamation.
Yes, November 1st, 1858. It's read out by Lord Canning at a grand durbar in Allahabad. It's often been called the Magna Carta of the Indian people, because it was essentially a peace offering. It made several key promises.
No more annexation. The era of conquest is over. The Indian princes were promised that their rights, dignity, and territory would be respected. The doctrine of Lapse was officially buried.
So in a strange way, the princes who survived actually won. They secured their kingdoms for the next 90 years.
In a way, yes. The British realized the princes could be useful allies, breakwaters in the storm, as Canning called them, so they stopped threatening them and started cultivating them as supporters.
Religious non-interference. The Queen promised that the British government would not interfere in Indian religious beliefs and customs. No more aggressive social reforms, no more overt support for missionaries.
And what about the rebels themselves? What happened to them?
The proclamation offered a general pardon for everyone, with one major exception. Anyone who had been directly involved in the murder of British subjects was exempt. So if you just fought in a battle against the British Army, you were forgiven. If you participated in a massacre like the one at Kanpur, you were hunted down and executed.
So the revolt failed to kick the British out, but it forced them to completely change their entire style of rule.
It did, but it also created a permanent psychological divide. The British never really trusted Indians again, especially not in the army. They completely reorganized the army. They stopped mixing different castes and religions in the same regiments. They created the racist theory of martial races. They started recruiting heavily from communities that had stayed loyal, like the Sikhs, Gurkhas, and Pathans, and they drastically cut recruitment from places like Oud and Bengal who had rebelled. It was the beginning of the formal, state-sponsored policy of divide and rule.
This is a huge amount of information. Let's pivot now to exam mode. For everyone studying, how does UPSC actually test this complex chapter? We have some specific questions here we can look at.
Right. Let's look at the prelims first. The exam absolutely loves to try and trick you with names, terms, and associations. Take a look at this question from the 2020 prelims, question 35. It asks about the term Ogulin, or the Great Tumult, and look at the options. A is the Revolt of 1857, and D is Birsa Munda's Revolt.
Ah, I see the trap. Great Tumult sounds a lot like Great Revolt. A student in a hurry might be tempted to pick 1857.
That's the entire point of the question. But Ugalan is a very specific term associated with the tribal revolt led by Birsa Munda at the end of the century, 1899-1900. 1857 is usually called the Sepoy Mutiny, or First War of Independence. The lesson is you have to be precise with your terminology. Another classic factual question type is strictly associative, just simple matching. Another classic factual question type is strictly associative, just simple matching. Who led the revolt in Kanpur? Nana Sahib. Another classic factual question type is strictly associative, just simple matching. Who led it in Bihar? Kunwar Singh. Another classic factual question type is strictly associative, just simple matching. Who was the governor general during the revolt? Canning. Another classic factual question type is strictly associative, just simple matching. Who was the first person to call it the First War of Independence? V.D. Savarkar. Another classic factual question type is strictly associative, just simple matching. You need to have these pairs locked and loaded in your memory. They're easy marks if you know them.
And what about for the mains? We mentioned that artisans question earlier.
Yes, that was 2017 Mains Paper 1. The question was, examine how the decline of traditional artisanal industry in colonial India crippled the rural economy. Here's the strategy for a question like that. Don't just list facts. You have to build a chain of causality. Show the examiner you understand the process. 1. You start with the policy, discriminatory British tariffs. 2. That leads to impact 1, the destruction of Indian weavers, which is de-industrialization. 3. That leads to impact 2, the forced migration of these artisans to villages, which causes overcrowding of agriculture.
4.
And the final result, widespread rural poverty and famine, which created the anger that fueled 1857. 4. And the final result. If you can draw that logical flowchart in your answer, you'll get top marks. Use 1857 as the evidence of the anger caused by this economic chain reaction.
That's brilliant. It's not about what you know, it's about connecting what you know. Causality is key.
And also, you have to be ready for the classic critical analysis question. Something like, was the revolt of 1857 a mere mutiny or a full-fledged war of independence? Critically discuss. The trick here is, don't take a side. Explain why the British historians called it a mutiny. Lay out their arguments. Then, explain why Indian nationalists like Savarkar called it a war of independence. Lay out their arguments. And then you conclude with a nuanced synthesis of a historian like S.N. Sen. Whatever it may have started as, it eventually became a struggle for freedom from foreign rule. Balance is everything in a UPSC mains answer.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. From the grease on a single cartridge to the Queen's proclamation changing an empire, we've seen the incredible bravery of the Rani and the sheer brutality of the suppression.
It's a heavy chapter, no doubt.
Yeah.
But it is the absolute foundation of modern India. You can argue that 1857 marks the end of the medieval era in India and the bloody birth of the modern political struggle for independence.
And that actually leads us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you to take away.
Yeah. We talked about how the educated Indian middle class, the intelligentsia, actually opposed the revolt in 1857. They wanted the British to stay and modernize the country. But here's the great irony. Just 28 years later, in 1885, that very same class of people, the lawyers, the journalists, the teachers, were the ones who founded the Indian National Congress. They became the leaders of the new freedom struggle.
So the people who rejected the violent revolution of 1857 ended up leading the political, nonviolent one.
Exactly. And so you have to wonder, did the bloody failure of 1857 teach them a lesson? Did they look at the crushed rebellion and realize that you can't defeat the modern British Empire with swords and old feudal kings? Did the failure of 1857 force them to adopt the constitutional method, the method of petitions, protests, and eventually Gandhi's Satyagraha? Perhaps the method used to win freedom in 1947 was a direct reaction to the failure of the method used in 1857.
That is a deep thought to end on. Failure isn't just the end of a story. Sometimes it's the lesson that shapes the beginning of the next one.
Well said.
All right, friends. That brings us to the end of this deep dive. We really hope this story is now burned into your memory.
And if you found value in this deep dive, please, we ask you humbly, Subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP on YouTube. Honestly, it is the best way to support us and ensure we can keep doing this for you.
And don't forget about all the resources. Check the link for our public Telegram channel for the free notes and the PYQ practice questions. You really don't want to miss out on those.
And for the serious aspirants, the future officers out there, remember the private Telegram library. That's where you get the premium notes, the model answers, the whole shebang. Just DM us on the public channel to get access.
And finally, a huge, huge thank you to everyone who is supporting us on Patreon. You guys make this possible. If you can, please consider joining them. Every little bit helps.
Keep learning and always keep questioning.
And we'll see you in the next deep dive.